All right, to begin our meeting, I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement, as we do with all of our meetings and events. We honor with gratitude the Indigenous peoples whose ancestral homelands all firewood banks occupy. We will continue to work as allies toward Indigenous community access and self-determination in natural resource management on these lands. So to start off, because we have this manageable group size, I'd love to have everybody introduce themselves and say where you're calling in from, where you're sitting, what your connection to a wood bank is, or what your organization is, and your favorite tool for wood processing. We'll start with that. So Brad, I think you're at the top of my screen. Would you like to start us off?
I certainly don't belong on the top of your screen. But anyway, my name is Brad Craig. I live in Jefferson, Maine. I'm on the board of the Community Housing Improvement Project organization, nicknamed CHIP. Brittany, who is on my computer to my left, is the program manager for us, and I'm just a volunteer on the board. My favorite tool is the splitter. That's what I seem to get assigned to, and so far I've enjoyed it. Okay.
Feel free to jump in if somebody else is ready. Otherwise, I can assign.
Sure, I'll follow Brad. I'm Brittany Gill and work with Brad at the Community Housing Improvement Project, CHIP. And we do home repairs, but also fuel assistance, and the firewood is part of our fuel assistance program. And sort of recently made a transition from a few private individuals bucking up a lot of wood for us to trying to organize it more officially. And I have been out to a couple work sites, and I love throwing the wood into the truck. I don't mind using the splitter, but I can't. I guess we have a couple different splitters we've been using. So anyway, thank you.
Okay, I'll jump in. I'm John Ackerley, head of the Alliance for Green Heat, which is based in Maryland. I think most of you probably know us because we got the award from Forest Service to give grants to firewood banks. And my favorite tool is simply the axe. I've used it, since I was a kid when my dad used to make me use it, which I didn't enjoy so much, especially when we had to, when all the elms died. After elm disease, elm is a terrible wood to split. And so I got pretty good at it and never hurt myself. So the axe is still my favorite.
I can go next. Can you hear me? My name's Tony DeMarco. I live in Freeport, Maine, and I'm just getting started with an interest in creating a wood bank for this area. I'm retiring in April, so I'm going to have more time to dedicate to it. But my favorite tool is, just like John, the splitting axe, and I just love the feeling of the cracking. We have a lot of red oak here, and it just splits so cleanly.
I guess that leaves me. My name is Ed. I'm in Springfield, Missouri, and my favorite tool, since I'm by myself most of the time, is other people's tools. When they buck up logs and put rounds in their dump beds and get it off their property and bring it onto borrowed property that I'm using. I don't have any property, and the Lord has blessed me with a lot of friendly people who let me use their stuff. And so, yeah, my favorite tools are other people's saws and dump trailers and dualies and skid steers, etc.
Wonderful. Thank you all. That is great. Yeah, quite a variety. And that it seems like our main contingent is strong here. I know there were others who wanted to join us, but we just had this. I don't know if everybody was on when we were talking about this wild storm that we've had over the past few days, and a lot of people are still without power and internet. So hopefully they could make use of this recording as well. But some of the questions that I got from you all and other folks who registered for this session were about safety practices and safety training, and that was a big focus on of how you train your volunteers and also how you ensure volunteers. So that's a question that I want to pose to all of you, because in my research, it looks like most nonprofits or volunteer organizations might have some general liability. They might have waiver forms, but there might be workers' compensation insurance that they get for volunteers as well as employees. So I'm just wondering, how do you all approach safety training? And Ed, I know that you have some more to talk about this, but whoever'd like to jump in is great.
Well, since you brought my name up, I'm happy to start. My wife and I started our nonprofit because local agencies in the area, volunteer agencies like the food bank and church groups, those kind of things, were not getting any training because training is so expensive. So over the years, we've both become CPR first aid trainers, and I have become an OSHA equipment trainer. And so now we regularly go to our local food bank and conduct OSHA training for their forklifts and their electric pallet jacks. And I also work with a big nonprofit where we do a lot of chainsaw training because we do disaster cutting work. And I have attended several chainsaw trainings myself, and I'm going to start one in January that will, at the end of 12 weeks, will actually be able to train through that organization that's been around for 40-something years. So we're looking to beef that up even more than it is now, because everyone knows safety training is important, but everyone also knows that safety training can be very expensive. So that's why we started our nonprofit, and it has worked very well. And so locally here, for people that come and volunteer for us, you asked about insurance. I've talked to our insurance agent who insures our organization's pickup. Somebody gave us a 3/4 ton pickup, and we have it insured. And I talked to them about general liability and whatnot because of the conversation getting started through the Green Heat grant. Made me look in a lot of areas I hadn't looked at before. I appreciate all of the thought-provoking things that are included in the grant application. And I'm still a little confused about that as far as volunteers, this, that, and the other. You know, if it looks like you're moving wood for your business, even if your business is a nonprofit, you know, you all know that. You probably have had the same discussions, but I'm still looking at it. But prompted by the application, I have drafted our release of liability form. And one of our board members is the county prosecutor, which helps because he knows what to do and what not to do. And so he and I are still tweaking our liability form waiver for people to come and volunteer. But for our volunteers, if they haven't been trained or I don't know them well, I either train them or I have them show me what they know, because some people show up to volunteer and they've been doing it 40 years. You just have to make sure they know what they're doing before they from time to time, a chainsaw can be a dangerous hand tool. And so anyway, that's where we are in the process. A safety trainer is what I do for a full-time job at our big nonprofit with 300 employees. And so I wouldn't say I'm all about safety, because somebody from my childhood found out that I was a safety trainer, and they said that they must be hard up for helpers there if you're the safety guy. So I haven't always had a history of safety, but I do still have all my fingers after 50 years of running a chainsaw. So far, so good. All right.
Thanks, Ed. That's great.
Could I just ask you to elaborate, Ed, on the chainsaw training, the program that you've used or ones that you found that have been useful, or yeah, just expand on that a little bit more specifically?
Sure. Like a lot of, well, I was going to say like a lot of guys, I've been watching a lot of videos where there are women who barely weigh 120 pounds, and their saw probably is 3/4 of their weight, and they're doing a lot better job than I am felling burning trees in the forest. But like a lot of people, I did what my dad told me to do for many, many decades, and then I went to a training and had to be retrained. So the guy I went to training with and spent a week there is Tim Ard, and he is in Rome, Georgia. And anybody that's been around the chainsaw world of training will know Tim Ard, because he's been almost 40 years training people. And his training is very easygoing, but very specific. It all makes sense. He has a whiteboard that explains, when you make this notch and you put your wedge in here, the tree falls that way. In fact, that's how we had to pass the course. So you drive a white stake in the ground and you have to mark a place on the tree where the tree is going to land on the stake, or you don't pass. So lots and lots of videos by Tim Ard on YouTube, and other people, just like anything else. You can get a degree to be a brain surgeon if you watch YouTube long enough, but a piece of paper doesn't make you a brain surgeon. Tim and a lot of other good sawyers have a lot of instructional stuff on YouTube to help you with what you're doing. But I would suggest, if at all possible, attending a training. And we have spoken about further talk about training as we go by, as this goes along. And I'm happy to help in any way I can with that. I'm no master, but again, I have all my fingers and my toes, and I've never even cut my skin with a chainsaw. So that was one of the questions he asked first at the first class I went to. How many of you cut yourself with a chainsaw? None of us raised our hand, and he said, they're the first group I ever had of 9 or 10 people that haven't cut themselves with a saw. So anyhow, it is something that you should keep after. I know you mentioned throwing wood in the pickup. You can get injured throwing wood in the pickup, but you can really get injured if you do the chainsaw improperly. So aside from myself or someone else being there to hold the training, you can just kind of keep yourself tuned up on YouTube and other instructional videos, but I think hands-on are the best. Have someone there, and you can drop trees. They can show you different cuts. And for our courses here, we're doing disaster cutting. So, when we get done cutting, sometimes we find a doghouse or even a car underneath all of the trees, because we go to the tornadoes and hurricanes and that kind of thing. So that is, and I really enjoy that. I got kicked a couple of times growing up on the ranch, kicked in the head. So there's something wrong with me, because I really enjoy the disaster chainsaw work. I don't know if that helps with your question, but hands-on is probably the best especially when it comes to chainsaws.
We've got somebody who just joined us. Kelly, would you like to introduce yourself and say where you're coming from? And we're talking a little bit about tools and
Okay.
safety training. So
Yeah,
jump
sorry.
in.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I tried to join in the beginning, but we had to run and get a tarp for a tree that went through a house. So it was not good reception. So yeah, I'm Kelly Metcalf, live near Charlottesville, Virginia. We have a tree service, Metcalf Tree Service, and my husband started at 42 years ago. And from there, we moved into donating most of our wood to a nonprofit that we formed about 18 years after we started doing it. So Start a Spark is the name of our nonprofit, and we deliver wood to about 6 different counties around here. We have volunteers that come and split. We actually pivoted. For the longest time, we would have these events. We had waivers. People brought wood splitters if they had them. If they didn't, we would sign them up, do a little safety, training before we start. For the most part, a lot of our volunteers were repeats, so we already knew that they knew what they were doing. We got a lot done for a lot of years, and then we became a nonprofit. And the paperwork it slowed us down because now they wanted us to have separate insurance for the nonprofit to hold the events, so to speak. And we just now figured out our insurance. So now we are purchased 2 wood splitters with our grant money, and it'll be one of them's coming this week. So we're pivoting into volunteers signing up to come use the wood splitters at different times. So we're not just holding events. So that's kind of where we're at. As far as safety goes for us, my husband's been doing this a long time, so he's very particular about who steps foot and uses a chainsaw on the property. Not just chainsaws, but like you said, throwing wood, using the hydraulic splitters, there's risk in all of it. And just staying on top of it, being aware, not letting people cut and split when they're tired, having a plan in place.
That's great. Thank you. John, did you have your hand up?
Yeah. First of all, I just want to say how great it is to see everyone's face and hear your stories. I think most of you have got to know Pam Porter. When she processes applications, she's a rock star in our group. I think she's been great, and I know she knows you guys a little better. But this whole safety issue has really been weighing on us. So I'm all ears. For us, sending out this money is a bit of, we're kind of like trusting groups. I mean, to be safe, because there's not too much we can do from afar. But there is more that we can and should be doing, I think. So we're really wondering, next year, actually, maybe even starting in the spring, whether we should be hosting more formal online trainings or hosting in-person regional trainings, and really making sure that at least we're offering the opportunity to get training and to figure out, how the different ways that banks can offer trainings. We've heard a lot of models of people like Kelly, you're saying, often it's really one-on-one. You get to know each volunteer and you know what they're able to do and you train them up, or you send them, have them do something else. Luckily, we're not really thinking that we're going to deal with felling trees. Very few wood banks actually get involved in that. So, and we're glad about that. That's a whole.
You don't.
Yeah,
insurance would be a whole different story.
That's right. That's a whole different story. But as Ed was saying, chainsaws are extremely dangerous. I still have all 5 fingers, but I have to say, there have been many a time where it's slipped a little bit. It's come within a few inches, and so as I say, we're all ears. I think this is maybe the one area that we feel we have kind of an ethical obligation to do more, since we're putting money into the hands of groups who are buying the chainsaws. And we also want to help groups legally protect themselves. But in the process of legally protecting themselves, the idea is that you are also educating your volunteers about the dangers. And these when you do a waiver of liability, it's only, it helps a little bit legally, but you can still get sued. We could still get sued. A piece of paper is a good thing to have, but if nothing protects you in America from being sued. Luckily, I think we're all working with very well-meaning people. So we're not working with like the general public who you don't have a relationship with. And but
Yeah, but it's a scary thing.
it
It's
is
a
a
scary
scary
thing
thing.
when I have groups sign up. For example, the UVA lacrosse men's lacrosse team. The year that they became national champs, they were volunteering for us in events, and these young guys would come out, and really they didn't want to mess with the hydraulic wood splitter, because I don't let anybody like that touch a chainsaw. Their coach actually is good on a chainsaw, so he was doing all the cutting, but they just wanted to do axe like you can't split very quickly with an axe. That's not going to do us a lot of good, but that's what they wanted to do. And I just stood back going, holy cow, no, 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 because next time you need steel toe boots on, you need,
Yeah.
but they just wanted to, that's what they wanted to do. So it's scary because you get people signing up and they have good intentions. But it comes down to what they've done before in the past and what they know about safety, and not just coming out here and having a good time doing competitions with each other. So we have to take every group individually. It does take time at the beginning to go through the training process. And this is why I'm glad right now that we're doing it differently, and we can set it up where we have smaller groups come in when they can, and then not so many people at once where you're having to look in so many directions. It was too much. So we hope that this will help the safety here for sure. I'll be able to scatter them out a little bit better, not have so much going on at one time.
Yeah.
So I missed the beginning of this. Can you recap anybody who has put insurance in place? Has anybody put insurance in place other than me?
We're still looking for
yeah.
insurance.
Yeah.
We're yeah. You want to go ahead, Brad, or I can?
Well, I was just going to say, we're still looking for insurance. I think maybe from these conversations, I figured out that might be better if we introduced ourselves a little more thoroughly. As Brittany said, we have a sort of a motto of the organization: neighbors helping neighbors stay safe, warm, and dry. So we do a variety of things, from interior storm window inserts to trailer or manufactured home door replacements, to things just trying to help people stay safe, warm, and dry. And we're a small organization, although we've been around for 40 years, I believe, so since the early 80s, and have a budget. I've put it into some perspective here of around $300,000 a year, Brittany, 300, a little bit more maybe. But in our woodworking and in our wood processing group, we've had a group of guys, 3 guys, who for 8 or 10 years have prepared wood for us, firewood for us, on the order of 10 to 20 cords a year. And we recently, they've aged out. One of them was in his 90s, believe it or not. And as far as I know, still has all his fingers. But now we've got a larger group. We're in a transition period where we have a larger group of people. For us, 16 or 18 volunteers. They don't all come at the same time, but they do come, and on their own volition, they get organized, and wood is donated for us. And I'm blithering on here, but there are a couple of perspective things I think is important for us to consider and for you to know about. Here in Maine, we're one of 9 states in the country that has a Good Samaritan law, which shields the nonprofits to some extent more thoroughly than in a lot of states. So not everything is looked at from a nonprofit business organization. It's in a Good Samaritan area, and we're learning more about that. Brittany, in a minute, you can try me direct them to those two publications from the Volunteer Association, or this government's volunteer coordinator top operation. But anyway, we have just, or I have taken, as we're trying to explore these things, 2 online courses, because I think the chain of responsibility or legitimacy should end in some sort of an organization that's recognized. And so I've taken a course that actually came out of Canada, and it's a basic course, and a course that came out of the United States. And they were talking about similar things that have already been mentioned, like disaster work or felling trees or things that we are controlling by simply not doing. You know, we're happy to receive trees that are already on the ground, and our people will work with them. Those who want to help us come to help us. We won't do anything in a tree, for example. We won't try to fell trees. So we're trying to limit, you know, what we're trying to protect people for. I will add one footnote from my professional experience as an engineer and working in a heavy industry, railroading industry. We were trained as managers to never say something's dangerous. You know, chainsaw is not dangerous. It's hazardous. It becomes dangerous when you don't use it properly. And that's why you try to, you know, create the recognition that there are certain ways to operate a piece of equipment. And if you keep aware of that helps you. Both courses I took, getting back there a minute, spoke about, for example, areas around where people are working and distances between operations and so forth. Stability, level of the ground, physical status, physical strength, frequent breaks, stay hydrated, you know, things like that, which are all basic things. But one of the guidelines in our volunteer book, that are brochures that Brittany will point out, is that it's good for a nonprofit to offer some sort of training better than not having any training. And we're looking into the idea of offering to pay. We haven't decided yet. We're still researching things, but offering to pay for online courses that really are pretty thorough. The similarity of the two courses in the Canadian government produced courses and the U.S. privately produced courses were very, very similar. So anyway, I'm taking up too much time right now. Brittany, do you want to add anything, or what have I forgotten?
Yeah, I guess I would say in our looking at insurance specifically, I am learning so much about insurance, but I think what John said is that what I've learned is that waivers aren't worth much, except that they're warning your volunteers, like it's just a layer of saying you are getting into something dangerous and you know that. So it's important for everybody to be aware. And then I think the second layer, like Brad was saying, is that the nonprofit, for our sake, but also for the volunteer sake, needs to provide some just basic training to be working on that, to be in communication. That is a second layer of protection. The third layer is insurance. And the funny thing, so we have insurance for our home repair program. And when we mentioned we were doing a wood bank, they're like, nope, not included. We're like, ha ha ha, okay. Turns out that that was only on so we have secondary health and medical coverage, which means their medical coverage, the volunteers' medical coverage is used first. And when theirs doesn't cover something, then ours would cover it. And so that's the medical. The general liability is if a volunteer were to make a mistake on somebody else's property, there's a ripple effect, and somebody's car gets damaged, somebody's house gets damaged, you know, something happens because of the work that they were doing. So I was able to find two local companies that did give us a quote. One said that they could do a standalone quote separate from the rest of our policies, and that standalone quote was for $1,000 for general liability. It doesn't. It's hard to tell if it included any health support, medical support or not. But there was that, and then this other quote I got was definitely just liability. It included our home repair and the firewood program, and it was outlined firewood and home repairs. And the firewood was, I said, why does this say $4 and this one says 986? The firewood was $4 of that $1,000 quote, and I was surprised, right? And he said it's very unusual for an actual liability to happen where there's a, if you're on somebody's house doing a home repair, there's a much higher liability that you're going to do something wrong and there's going to be a consequence. If you're cutting wood, it's more likely that you're going to have a medical issue than you're going to have a liability issue. And so those, for me, was it's a learning process of trying to figure this out, but it seems like there's two separate areas of insurance. And Kelly, I don't know what you've experienced in that way, but I'm just getting quotes from each of those companies to say, what if you covered our entire program? We didn't have, including medical, including liability, both our home repair and our fuel assistance. Or firewood. And so we're still working through that and getting it signed up from volunteers. But I think that's what I've learned in insurance. And those are the layers. One is the waiver, two is doing some kind of training and support. And like Brad and Kelly both have mentioned, it's I think harder to with the training, like to know things, but then to implement it. It's like I have these old guys that can't hear anything with hearing protection on running loud tools. And it's like, wait, stop. Trying to figure out how do we communicate this information. But then that third piece is the insurance and knowing what it actually does and doesn't do.
Yeah, so my insurance for me is a love-hate relationship. I have put way more time into this than I ever anticipated. Because in the beginning, before we became a nonprofit, look, we knew everybody, we knew every church organization that came here. We pretty much knew every person. And it was upon faith, Luckily, we never had anything happen. Most that we had happen back then was a piece of wood chip flew across the way. I don't even know how far it came from one person's, and it nipped somebody's nose. The bishop in our church actually nipped his nose and he had to go get some stitches. And that was our wake up moment where it was like, okay, that could have been real bad. So basically we got into nonprofit status, started looking around, got a liability policy in place. That's like a whopping $600 a year. That covers the equipment, things just like you mentioned, but it wasn't going to cover anything if somebody got hurt. And that is the piece that I've been chasing. And the best that I have done so far is I was just pulling it up. It's an accident policy. So basically, and I don't know if I can put this in my waiver or not. It just came to my brain, but we have liability. We have this accident policy now. Seems like we should be able to put in the waiver. Again, it won't hold up, and we know this. But if we can say, hey, we have liability insurance and we have an accident plan, your individual health insurance plan would then kick in anything else. This accident plan is like $300 a year, and I had to give how many volunteers typically that we have. And so what'll happen at the end of the year when we do an audit is I'll go through and look at how many volunteers I had. And if I have to up that, then they'll have to pay more money kind of thing. But we just didn't even know where to start with it.
Yeah, that sounds similar, right? That accident plan versus right. I think that's what our secondary medical is.
Yeah, actually, like pipe up in here. It's an AD&D plan with excess medical coverage. It sounds very similar to what we have. the form you renew every year is really based on or focused on team sports, little leagues, and things. How many participants and what age ranges are you dealing with every year? So it sounds very much like what you have. It's from the fireman insurance in New York, I think.
Well, one thing that no one's mentioned yet that I think is really important is keeping good records, because something does happen. You want to be able to show that you have all those liability waivers, on hand, and that you've kept track of who's trained and who's not. Because that's one thing we haven't kind of followed up on. We put out these liability waivers, but we don't know who's using them, or once they're used, if they're collected and stored in one place. I think that'll help banks stay more organized, and it's part of will be part of your defense if you get sued, to show that you are actually implementing your rules and your safety guidelines.
I have waivers from 10 years back.
Wow, now that's impressive.
Yeah, our
That
volunteer
whole
does a
file
nice
cabinet
job
over
of.
there is full of waivers. I'm scared to throw them away. I know I don't need that far back, but it's like, you never know.
I know financial records, I think non supposed to keep them for 7 years. I don't know for safety records if there's something. Hey,
It's excessive.
Yeah, the other thing that we've been meaning to explore, if there's any way that we as the Alliance for Green Heat can get some umbrella policy, and that all the banks can fall under. And I don't know if banks have to have some, go through some process to show that they are following safety practices or something, but that's something we want to explore.
That would be great. We tried to explore a policy under our business like that, but we couldn't get it done.
Yeah, so we will do that. We actually got another little grant to work on things like that.
Nice.
We haven't got any money yet from it, but we hear that we will be getting some again from Forest Service.
That's really neat.
So,
yeah, we had talked about that in Maine as well, in a state by state sort of situation of doing umbrella
Yeah.
insurance policies.
That may be
Can
may be easier to do state by state.
Yeah, can I ask two questions? One, Brad and Brittany, if you would be willing to share the online safety courses that you were mentioning. And I think there was a volunteer booklet that you mentioned. That would be
Yeah,
really
I
interesting.
tried to figure out how to get it onto the chat, but I can't do that. But I can forward it to you, Elisa. And Brad has the links to the courses he took.
That would be
Well,
wonderful. And if you put them in the chat, that'd be great. And I can share them if you're willing.
Yeah, I think I can email them to you. I couldn't
That
figure
would be
out
great.
where I
Yeah,
have them.
that would be wonderful. And I wanted to jump in also. We can get back to the questions of insurance policies, but Tony's just getting started out here, and I was wondering, Tony, if you have any particular questions about safety or tools or any kind of equipment needs for all of these people who've been in the game for a few years. So.
And Tony, I hope we're not scaring you off with all this talk.
It's not always the most inspiring way to start, but
yeah. Right now I'm a sponge, and so much. I'm sorry I had to step away briefly, but I don't have any specific questions because I feel like I don't even know what to ask at this point. I don't want to derail the conversation. I do feel like it's helpful for me to connect with you and with questions as as they start to. Questions are before we get to liability. It's more like forming a nonprofit. Grant money.
Can you tell me a little bit about your wood bank? I missed your introductions completely if you were here before I jumped on.
So I don't have a wood bank yet.
Okay.
I'm looking to start a wood bank in my area. I'm retiring in April. That's when I plan to have more time to devote to it. But I kind of wanted to get it started because I'm interested in getting it going. And I've been working a little bit with some of the local wood banks, help out and learn more. Jumped in so I could and kind of get and learn.
No, that's
And to hear you talk about doing it for 10 years is really impressive. So
actually, we've been doing this
mean-
for 18 years. We've been doing this for probably, long time. That's just how long I saved the records. Are you working with tree services to get your wood donated? How are you getting your wood?
now I had done a lot of clearing on my property, and that's kind of what gave me the idea. Is I have a lot of split firewood. I wanted to start donating it.
Right.
Into an idea of bank. I didn't want to handle any of the administrative parts of it, so I wanted to connect to either other wood banks or other associations to do the vetting and identify the individuals who needed it. Split, store, stack. The time others to certainly liability insurance, medical insurance. Recognizing that now.
Yeah, especially if you're going to
asking.
have other people and it's not just you splitting your own wood. Yeah.
And I have a lot of friends who are interested in helping, so I need to make sure that they're trained and that they're covered.
a good place to start. Wonderful. Well, yeah, Tony, please jump in with any questions or connect to me, or I'm sure anybody else here will be willing to answer questions about operations as you get into it.
Woo! Everybody, I just got word that my wood splitters will be here tomorrow. There was a delay in shipment. Sorry.
So what kind of wood splitters did you get, Kelly?
We got 2 TW2s with hydraulic lifts for the older folks, and the 4-way split. And there was one other upgrade. I forget. We didn't buy chainsaws or any other big ticket items. We used all of it for 2 wood splitters and some safety PPE that we've been using on the tree side that I just chuck over, but now the charity has its own. Yeah.
You want to talk about safety PPE a little bit?
Sure. So one of the big things when our volunteers come in, we have a table set up, and generally if they don't bring their own safety glasses, hearing protection, all of the things that they need, then we provide that. Generally, I try to make sure people know, like, you need to come with steel toe boots. You need to come with specific things, because you drop a piece of wood on your foot, it's going to hurt. People generally don't realize that. They just want to come and help. I've had pregnant women running hydraulic wood splitters before. Anybody can do it. You just need to have safety glasses on. You need to have your hearing protection in. You need to wear gloves, and you just need to be safe. Those are primarily the biggest PPE, that we enforce. I'm trying to think. Yeah, jump in if I'm forgetting something, which I probably am. But for me, that's the biggest thing, making sure that they're protecting their ears, they're protecting their eyes. And then those who are running chainsaws have chaps on. And that's the next round. We want to get some chaps and stuff that I'm not throwing over from the business anymore. We had an incident last year where our tree guys needed the chaps for the job we had scheduled, but yet I had all these volunteers coming, and I was like, guess we're not doing tree work today because we needed it in that direction, which is fine. But I think being prepared, knowing who's coming, knowing how much of everything you need is the most important thing. And it's mandatory. It's not a choice. Yeah.
John, did you have something to add?
Well, back to insurance, although I'm glad to talk about PPE. We found the majority of wood banks that have insurance often have it through a church or a tribe that they're affiliated with. And so I don't know if it's possible if you can simply affiliate with the church just to come under their liability insurance. Or if they would agree to that, and whether that would.
I've approached a few.
Yeah, no, that
It's not that easy.
No, because we'd have to split it on their site too, I believe. And for us, that just wasn't going to work. But I wish, because that'd be the easiest thing to do.
So I think a lot of churches that run wood banks, I'm not sure that the insurance company knows about the wood bank, which is
Nope.
another issue.
Yeah, I talked to a couple of people and I asked them that specific question, and they said, "Well, they know what we do." I said, okay.
Yeah, maybe their responsibility to ask the questions. I don't know.
Well, I had to be very specific. My insurance agent, this guy, bless his heart, I need to buy him a pizza or something, but he must have worked on insurance for us for 3 months, like just bouncing different companies here and there. And then someone that's on my board, he's actually an attorney for nonprofits. He's the one that got our nonprofit organized. He found somebody right the same exact day. He found a company through one of his other charities that was willing to write the same type policy that my agent had found. But it seems like there's not a lot that want to cover this type of thing. It's very specific.
Yeah, you don't really blame them, do you?
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. No. We even looked at, so my agent, he had one insurance company tell us we needed workman's comp insurance. And I said, how can I have a workman's comp policy? I have no payroll. They base it upon payroll. And so he said, well, we can figure out what somebody would make that splits wood. What do you think, Kelly? $15 an hour? And I'm like, what? So we went through this whole scenario of workman's comp that at the end of the audit season, I wouldn't have spent a penny on payroll. So it just didn't make any sense. And I said, we do not need a workman's comp policy. So we've gone through all the figuring out the insurance, what you can do and what you can't do. And so far, what I found, like Brittany, is liability, yes, and an AD&D or accident policy.
Yeah, that's interesting because that's the guidance that you get if you look up the National Nonprofit Insurance Association or something like that. You
Really?
get guidance to get workman's comp for volunteers. But that's really interesting. I didn't realize that that's
You
based on
cannot
payroll.
do
Doesn't
it.
make
Like
much
I
sense.
could have taken the policy out, but what would have happened? It would have cost me about $2,000 a month because they were basing it. I don't know how many volunteers I'm going to have that month.
Right.
If the more I have, the more. And I said, our bank cannot afford that. We literally, you're 300,000. I think we maybe had $6,000 in the bank before this grant. We're very small when it comes to money because the business, the Metcalf Tree Service, has funded this charity for 20 plus years. And so it's brand new for us to be a separate nonprofit. I'm grateful that we are because it was time to separate everything. But at the same time, it's figuring it out. You'll figure it out, Tony. It's a lot of fun. The biggest thing is you just want to help people. You want to make sure people are warm because it is downright heartbreaking when you cannot. And we went through that one time where we had to shut it down for a year. And that was the hardest year to tell people that you can't help them. So never again.
Well, I have to take off, but thank you so much for hosting. I really appreciate being part of the discussion and having it through you. Thanks so much.
Yeah,
Thank
Thanks
you,
for-
Brittany. Nice to see your
Yeah.
face. Ed, I wanted to ask you a quick question about, I noticed that there's online OSHA chainsaw safety training. And it's like $25, 30 minutes. Do you know what that entails and if that's useful, if that's helpful? If
I
you can
don't
say
know
that,
what that
Jeff.
entails. I have only
Okay.
taken in-person courses.
Nice, yeah.
Because we do so much heavy equipment training, there are a lot of courses online that you can, get certified, and we don't allow any of our people to do that with equipment. Now, we do have the American Heart Association has a blended course online, CPR first aid. You take 2/3 of it online, and then you meet with an instructor to do your skills. That's totally good because you're just watching the videos that you would watch in class, and then you perform the skills. I haven't taken any of those online equipment courses because, where I work, full-time job, and for our nonprofit, everything's in person. And, there's a roster signed, and everybody shows their skills and watches the demonstration, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not poo-pooing any of that stuff, but I can't speak into it because for equipment, specifically for equipment, we don't do any online stuff. However, there's a National Safety Alliance company in our town at work. Where I work is also a nonprofit, just a really big nonprofit. And we're starting discussions with those folks on those kinds of things, specifically for renewals. Once you are certified on a skid steer or a telehandler or a forklift, whatever, then you could do some renewal training online. But no, I can't. Aside from CPR first aid, which we do a lot of CPR first aid training for different groups. Outside of that, I haven't been involved in blended courses. We call them blended courses. But I think I would say I don't want to sound negative, but how would you certify somebody on anything? You can watch a safety video on a wood splitter, but if you're not there with a wood splitter with someone else who knows how to use it,
Yeah.
and where to put your hands, where not to put your hands, I've had the pieces of wood and the my wood splitter is a little cheaper. You put the 4-way on the wedge and shove it, and that's popped off. And because I was wearing my steel chainsaw helmet, this big piece of iron landed on my head. Well, if somebody had been using that and had not, you know what I'm saying? Things pop out of wood splitters, and how would you cover that on an online course? Again, you can watch the general safety ideas, but to certify somebody in our opinion, in both my little nonprofit and the big nonprofit I work full time for, everybody and again, I'm not poo-pooing it because I'm not familiar with it, but we have a lot of people that want to get certified in whatever, forklift, skid steer. We have multiple pieces of equipment we train people on. Everybody wants to be certified in an hour and a half. And, if you're going to take a course and have a piece of paper that said you are allowed to operate this piece of equipment, it takes more than 90 minutes to do that. And an online course, anyway, that's a long answer.
And
Your
how
short
about
question.
The chainsaw course that you're talking about specifically, I think that my husband does utilize that for tree climbers for just a basic, like this, when you get an ISA certification, like you just have to go through all the courses. So they're very informational. It's then the responsibility of the company or the nonprofit to do the hands-on part. But I think they are very good, especially for $25, to just have the basic informational, hey, this is how this works. This is how, don't do this kind of a thing. And so I think that's what the OSHA courses are.
Ed, how about if we had someone who was doing a live thing, not a canned video, but someone who is kind of training the trainer a bit. So if every wood bank was required to have one of their people who's designated as their safety person and have an online discussion with someone such as yourself about how to, and it wouldn't be a certification. It would simply be
Like a checkoff.
And these are the best practices, and here's what you need to do. And it wouldn't necessarily be the end of the process, but it would be a solid step in the process.
Yeah.
It's
I like that.
interesting. Again, being in Maine, I've learned a lot in the last year or two about this whole Good Samaritan law type issue. And it basically, as I understand it, sort of says, well, you do the best you can with what you got. And for the nonprofit, it's saying you're giving the opportunity for people to help you. But one of the underlying basis of that is that you're not requiring them. It's not an employee situation. They're not being compensated. They're coming to you on their own volition. They're not expected to do 2 chords a week or anything else. It's just they're there to help. And so the responsibility, as I see it, for us as an organization, is to, as we mentioned, provide the safety equipment, make it available. You can't make them work. You know, you can say, we want you to do it. We expect you to do it. If you don't do it, thank you for coming, but we don't need your help. You know, we can't go ahead with that. So it's a funny, you do the best you can with what you got. And that's the good intentions and part of being a nonprofit organization that's here to help people. It's hard to say, even if you, in my view, to tell the example like a piece of metal, you know, breaking off the head of the splitter. I mean, sure, you say that story, tell that story. You really don't know. Do you really understand that? You know, what you can say is, we've told them that. And that's basically what you're doing in these video courses. They're starting out with the details of chainsaw safety. How is it in good shape? How often do you tighten the blade or the chain? You know, stopping every time you refuel it, make sure you stop and have a bottle of water. You know, things that all sort of go related, best practices. My feeling on that is that here's an organization that is getting paid to do that. You pay for the course. They are shouldering some of the responsibility if they don't do the course well. We're saying it's available to you if you want to take it. Well, we aren't saying this yet. We're still considering it, but that we will not expect you to volunteer and spend your own money to do things. We'll compensate you for what you're doing to improve yourself, to help yourself get better in what you're doing. The other thing that I've got in the drift here too is you try to limit your liabilities. The story about that goes both to the question of umbrella insurance and liability. When one of our first Zoom meetings or conference calls a year or so ago with an insurance company up in Presque Isle, Maine, talked about a local Boy Scout troop that was, you know, doing good deeds. They were getting their merit badges for something, and they were delivering firewood to people who needed it for free. And there was a case where they'd stacked it in the basement. And it was a nice job, carried it down the basement, stacked it up and stuff. And during the winter, the firewood had dried out enough that it started to tilt, and it tipped and hit the furnace and the wood furnace. And there's disaster. Well, the local Boy Scout troop didn't have the insurance for that, but BSA did. And so they were covered by this umbrella policy from the Boy Scouts of America. We, on the other hand, won't go into people's homes. We will drop the firewood where they want us to drop it. We won't even go into their garages. We'll leave it in the driveway in front of the garage. But we try to limit our liability by not exposing ourselves to the liability, which is similar. Waldo County Wood Bank here in Maine has 8 distribution sites, but they won't even load it on trucks or cars for them. The people come in, they have their own vehicles, they load their own vehicles, and then it's their responsibility if there's any damage to their car, or if they're driving at home and they have an accident. It's not the wood bank's responsibility. So that's sort of an approach we're trying to figure out more about. How do we limit that? In Maine, it's interesting. One of the exceptions to Good Samaritan law to act has to do with automobile accidents. And the nonprofits are not protected by the law if somebody driving for them has an accident. So we are urged to get additional insurance for accidents, for things being done by volunteers, driving around, delivering firewood, or even just going to meetings or things you can say. You can always get sued for something. So one of the things we're trying to figure out is how do we limit our liability, and then try to manage our risk, logically and reasonably within the guidelines of the state of Maine. So down in Freeport, if you're going to be starting to doing more of this, I'd suggest you do get hold of the volunteer group in Augusta that's part of the state government and see what they can advise you on. And they do have these 2 publications that are quite useful.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah, John's
Thanks, Brad.
helping remind us of the time. This is a wonderful conversation. I'm really enjoying it. And I hope you all got interesting things out of it. If you have lingering questions or things that we didn't discuss or didn't get to, I hope you'll either type them in the chat right now or send me an email. And I'd love to have another discussion about these things, or if there's a professional of some kind that we could add to our discussion to give some more information to people, if that would be helpful. I'd love to organize that. But
I was just going to say real quick, if you could
Yeah.
add my information to the email, Tony, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I feel like if you're just starting out, you kind of could benefit from having like somebody to bounce off of, not waiting for these type of meetings, because I can't imagine just starting out and not having a resource.
That's a wonderful offer. Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah.
Kelly,
Great.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I will definitely share the conversation that we've had and the information that we've exchanged with all of you and with other folks in the Wood Bank network. So I'm really happy that we could all get together this morning.
Thantake you.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Okay.
Have a great Christmas.
You too.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.